graph here that somewhat dovetails into this conversation about when you should have sex and also marriage as a subject. And it shows that from the 1970s, roughly women would get married at about 21 years old. And now, this graph will be on the screen, it's about 30. Men used to get married at around 23 years old, and now it's just over 30, which is a pretty crazy climb. So it feels to me if the sexual revolution took place in around this era where we see this rapid climb, maybe the two are somewhat interlinked, i.e. the age in which we'd be getting married or having sex under Louise's, potential advice that it's better to wait.
It's because of the pill. That's why that happened. Mm-hmm. It's because it used to be that if you were having sex with someone, you were risking pregnancy. And now that's not, it is still true because actually all contraception fails and something like half of women in this country get pregnant didn't mean to or whatever. So the idea that it's foolproof is not true. But what the pill did when it arrived on the scene in the late 60s was it gave the illusion that sex was consequence-free. And it isn't on a physical level, not really. It's less consequential than it was because of the pill. But the physical consequences are still there. But I think just as importantly, it became no less emotionally consequential. Just because you're on the pill or using condoms or whatever, your mind, I'm thinking particularly of women who, as we talked about, bond more quickly, your mind still thinks that this person could well become the father of my child. You are still experiencing sex as in the way that all of our ancestors did for all of human history up until 5 minutes ago, until we invented this new technology. And I think that's why it has to, the reason that women have evolved to be picky about who they have sex with is because getting pregnant is an extraordinarily consequential thing for women. It's dangerous, it's difficult, it's a huge, investment of their time and of their life. And you don't want to get pregnant by some bozo. Right? That's why women tend to be very selective about who they're willing to have sex with and feel really bad. And I've got to say, I'm leaving aside words like sacred, because they're obviously difficult because of the religious implications. I think that we should, as feminists, describe sex as at least special, like having some kind of special status. It's not like other kinds of socializing. It's not like having a conversation with someone or playing tennis with someone. And we can tell that it's
been doing it wrong.
Well, but we can tell.
Well, we could call it one of the most intimate experiences you can have as a human being.
And that's why rape is so bad, right? That's why feminists
because
are
it bastardizes the most intimate experience by making it into by turning it into violence.
Rape is worse than theft, for instance, or rape is worse than assault. Like non-sexual assault. And the law recognises that. And we all socially recognise that because there is something uniquely intimate and therefore uniquely violating about having sex without consent. And I think that it's really hard actually to hold those two things simultaneously in mind and say sex is unimportant. It's basically just like a skill set that you can practice on other people, that it's a leisure activity, all this kind of...
It trivialises
Right.
it.
And then also say, but consent is extraordinarily important. Like, why? Do you not see the contradiction there?
Autonomy. If I want it, if I want somebody, especially penetrative sex, you're talking about rape, you're talking about penetrative sex, there's nothing worse than somebody inside your body violating your actual insides. Nothing worse than that. That does not mean that women do not have sexual urges that are exciting. No, I'm finished sentence. I wasn't allowed to interrupt. That women don't have sexual urges that are just about attraction and a moment and fun and play. Play is so important to human beings. When I left that cult, it took me a long time and a number of different sexual experiences to find out what kind of sexuality I even had. Mm. You can't necessarily find it with the first person you meet. They may not be sexually compatible with you. And you may not know how to communicate well with them and end up having a life of very boring missionary position sex. If you encourage young people just to have sex with the first person they meet and stay with that person, which I'm not saying you're saying, but I am saying if you don't have sex before you're engaged, well, engagement leads to marriage, you may end up with very little sexual fulfillment compared to what you could have had. You might not. You might get lucky. The first person you meet might just be amazing in bed with you and you find your space together and it might be wonderful. But I would say that is unlikely. And I would say that the reason that the pill changed how much sex women had and with what variety of partners is because it gave them autonomy. It gave them agency. Suddenly, I can. And guess what? When I can, I choose to try. When you give women the choice, which the pill did, to have some experience, we see that most women want some experience, want to find themselves sexually, want to feel, oh, this or not that, or yeah, or oh my God, this one. This is amazing. I could be with this guy forever. We hit it off. He's great in bed. We're working together. Oh, we've got a little problem now, but we'll work through it together because we love each other. Most people do some version of that. And maybe they hit a point in that monogamy where this relationship isn't working anymore, or something terrible happens, and they have another go at that. That's a large pattern. Now, how much of that is because that's what society expects? I don't know. But that is what most people tend to do. So for me, saying that because one night at a music festival, I had a really passionate, exciting encounter with somebody who I never saw again, that I am somehow minimizing rape is very disturbing.
Can I just interject and just say that you're right in turning to me and saying I didn't mean that you have to marry your first partner. But there's something very important about the emotional connection. And that's coming from maybe me being a therapist and knowing and seeing the pain that the young people who come to me are in. When there's no emotional connection and they give their bodies over, by the way, young men too. I think it's shifting, actually. It's interesting what I'm seeing in my practice. Young men are more vulnerable than women now. Women have taken on the role that young men used to have emotionally. And so, women have all these choices, and now they're leaving young men in the dust, and the young men are feeling lonely, and they have sex with a girl and they want to date her, and she says, no, I'm sleeping with 5 guys at the same time. And these are kids in their 20s. But sex is better with emotional connection. That doesn't mean you have to marry the first guy that you have sex with. I also want to say that there is something called neurotic repetition. A lot of the early feminists had a lot of trauma. You had trauma. A lot of people have had trauma. And what happens with trauma is it tends to be like PTSD. If we have disconnection early on, or abuse, or violence against us, attachment disorders, as I've talked about in your other podcasts when you're very young, it gets reenacted and repeated throughout your life over and over and over and over again. So interestingly, the early feminists were mostly traumatized women. If you look at the histories of them, they had physically abusive fathers, alcoholic fathers. They had uncles who raped them. They had, terrible, even their mothers too. Just really abusive parents, but mostly the men in their life were horrible. And so a lot of this whole experience depends on where you come from and what you had. If you've had good models, it's why I sort of talk about, I'm writing a book about divorce. Why am I writing a book about divorce if I believe in relationships? Because divorce is going to happen and we need to help parents to know how to raise healthy children in spite of it. But relationships matter. They matter in the raising of children. So when we have a disconnected society where we say relationships don't matter, just sex matters. Sex, sex, sex. Of course sex matters. But what I say to young people is sex is a very small part of a relationship. It really is, because in the beginning it's hot, hot, hot. And then as you get to know each other and you have the daily comings and goings of life, it's the friendship, it's the connection, it's the companionship, it's the relationship. But if you've had a lot of trauma, then you are not going to turn towards relationships.